Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Christina Masden, and I'll be presenting work conducted with my advisor, Keith Edwards, at the Georgia Institute of Technology. I'll be speaking about our paper, Understanding the Role of Community in Online Dating. So today I'll be talking about not only online dating, but how trying to understand online dating gave us insight into systems design. We set out to investigate how people are understanding how to use online dating websites, and during the study found that community interaction can play an important role. So imagine you're using an online dating website to find love. This particular screenshot is from OkCupid, but most online dating websites will look something like this: a profile with information about the individual and not much else. So you find Alice, and you read her profile and look at her pictures, and you think you might like to get to know a little bit more about her. The only real way to do this is to send a message. And that might be fine. Maybe Alice likes you as well, and you plan a date to meet up offline. But maybe she doesn't like you and just stops talking. Maybe she sends you a message that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe she just never even responds. And then that's it. You have no way of knowing if what you did was the cause of her lack of response. Maybe your initial message wasn't great, or maybe your profile was poor. And maybe she just gets so many messages that she'll end up responding back a few months later. But by that time, you've met the love of your life and you're well on your way to being engaged. There's really no way of knowing, and it's impossible for you to compare your interactions to the interactions that others are having on the website. Contrast that with something like Facebook, where comments and conversations can be public for all. So maybe you comment on this photo publicly, and maybe your comment wasn't great, but you know it because other comments have been interacted with via likes and responses. You can see how others are interacting, and you can see what has worked. There's a frame of reference. So why is online dating so different? Well, we know a fair bit about how people are using current systems and their behaviors on these sites. To touch on these points, deception is prevalent, with over half of users lying about something tangible and measurable. We also know that people ask for help when constructing their profiles. And we know that people care a lot about presentation of self and impression management. But there's a lot that differs from what we know about online communities. Members of online dating systems and websites don't have ways to observe the behavior of others or to be corrected by members of the community. All interactions are didactic, meaning that the only people who can see a conversation are those that are currently in the conversation. Online communities seem to work differently. For example, we know that newcomers can become experienced online community members through legitimate peripheral participation, essentially observation and practice. We also know that feedback and observation normalizes participation standards on social media, chiefly through moderation feedback and replies to comments. But on online dating websites, the only feedback users get are from those parties they have a private conversation with. There's no way to be corrected by community members or to lurk the interactions of other community members. So with this knowledge, we set out to answering the following questions. First, we are interested in how a didactic interaction system plays a part in shaping behavior. And more broadly, this means, how do users understand how to behave on a website if they're only given limited feedback? Second, we wanted to know if social practices and norms exist on online dating websites and systems. And if so, how are they established, considering the lack of feedback and visibility with respect to behaviors? How do users understand what is acceptable and what isn't, and how is this shared and communicated with others? And are there behaviors that may be acceptable on some sites and not other sites? How does site design influence the norms that are developed, if norms are developed? Third, we wanted to investigate spaces for new online dating designs. And in order to get at our research questions, we decided to look at and compare two very different systems, OkCupid and Tinder. OkCupid was launched in 2004, and it's a matching-based online dating system. Profiles are complete with text, photographs, and a match percentage, and this compares the compatibility of two users. These are the primary ways that a user selects a potential romantic partner. Users are free to message anyone they wish, so it's sort of like an open market messaging system. Here's a screenshot of an OkCupid profile. And to the right, you can see matching information like height. There are also photographs and extensive amount of text in the profile that the user has written. Tinder was launched in 2012, and it's a location-based phone application. Profiles have photographs and a very short list of personal information. And Tinder is connected to a user's Facebook profile, unlike OkCupid, and shows friends in common. Users will swipe left to dislike an individual and swipe right to like. If both users swipe right, they are matched and permitted to communicate with each other. This means that, unlike OkCupid, communication is contingent on mutual interest, so the messaging market is restricted. While we were investigating ways to recruit participants to answer these research questions, we noted that on Reddit, which is a text-based forum website with many smaller forums called subreddits, online dating site users often discuss the exact issues we were interested in rich detail on many subreddits. In particular, the two subreddits corresponding to our chosen systems, OkCupid and Tinder, were highly active. The OkCupid subreddit had over 60,000 members, and the Tinder subreddit had over 35,000 at the time of the study. Additionally, about 100 new threads with 1,000 new comments among them would not be uncommon on the OkCupid subreddit, and for the Tinder subreddit, 75 threads with 400 comments a day would also not be uncommon. We found that these study sites provided a window into the practices that were previously difficult to observe on our two chosen online dating systems due to their didactic dynamics, and we decided to proceed forward with a multiple method study. First, we observed these forums over a period of 4 months. This observation really allowed us to immerse ourselves in these communities, and from this session we formulated an interview guide. We then recruited 9 people who had participated in these subreddits to provide more depth and answer specific questions we had. All of them were either former or current OkCupid users, and 5 were current or former Tinder users. We administered demographic surveys and conducted semi-structured interviews of about 30 to 60 minutes, and an inductive thematic analysis was conducted on the transcriptions. The age range of our participants was 22 to 45, with a median age of 26. 3 were female and 6 male, so this means our interview sample was about 66% male. Reddit's overall proportion skews about 74% male. So as a quick preview of our findings, we've divided them into the following 4 categories, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first one now. So first, people want to discuss dating. That's really clear. But beyond that, people were using these communities as a way to discuss and set dating norms. There's a real need for community that's not being fulfilled by the online dating systems themselves. So I'll now introduce a user who first turned to the subreddits after being very frustrated with an online dating system. He says, "I posted asking for help once because I was so frustrated. That was the day I genuinely gave up on Tinder because I had just been liking everything for hours and hours and hours and just nothing." This is typical of the way that many users first began using these forums: frustration and confusion with online dating and wanting answers and help. Sharing of information and best practices frequently were framed as what not to do. P3, for instance, references subreddits dedicated to cringeworthy or creepy personal pictures or personal messages encountered on dating sites. These were instructive as cautionary examples not to be followed. It's a good indication of what not to type to women online, and it's a good reference to keeping your head in the game. Luckily, I haven't been doing any of those mistakes. And finally, users often post profiles for critique on the forums. Users will include a link to their profile, and community members can post comments and feedback. Many users describe using this to their advantage, not just to get critique on their own profiles, but to glean information about what others were doing right or wrong from their posted profiles and the discussions surrounding them. I think it's been interesting because most of the people that are posting on there are guys. So looking at the other guys' profiles is just seeing what other guys are doing because I wouldn't know otherwise. Now our second category of findings, strategies in gaming, or gaming the system. So absent feedback on these online dating systems, users devise their own ways to understand online dating, aka gaming. So I'll talk a bit about some of the system-specific techniques we heard about from users. So first, a feature on OkCupid shows a red or green dot on the messaging button. A red dot means that a user gets more messages than they receive, and a green dot means they send more than they get. So men typically have green dots, and women typically have red. P2 used this affordance to observe the profiles of men who have red dots, trying to understand if their profiles were somehow different from the typical man who had a green dot, and he wanted to see if he could glean any information on how to improve his own profile. Guys who are red dotted in OkCupid are pretty rare, and so what I did is I just went and looked at all of their profiles. And users often tried to find a way to get a better message return rate. OkCupid, at the time of this study, had a system where you could rate someone with stars, 4 out of 5, or 5 out of 5. And if you gave someone 4 or 5 stars, they were notified of your interest. This meant that instead of having to compose lengthy messages to many, many different people, you could just rate someone 4 or 5 stars and they would be notified of your interest. P2 speaks of using this feature in an extreme way in order to tell large numbers of women he was interested while avoiding composing too many unreturned messages. He says he 5-starred literally hundreds of people and talks about his message return rate being very high at 50 to 60 new messages a week. OkCupid also has a feature that allows notification when an individual has visited your profile and shows a visitor list of recent visitors. P8 was a female OkCupid user seeking men, and she wanted to see the kinds of women in her area who were also using the site, her competition. But to avoid triggering the notification or appearing on a visitor's list, she only looked at photographs without clicking through to the actual profile. She says, I just did a search, a cursory one to see who my competition is. I just didn't want them to think that I was checking them out, so I just looked at their photos. In this way, P8 established her own way of lurking by trying to go around the system requirements. And finally, we talked a bit about Tinder's messaging restriction. And many men avoided it and avoided this restriction in its intended way by simply swiping right in every woman in their area without even looking at their profiles, and then waiting to see who matched back with them, instead of selecting who they were most interested in first. So everybody in, I think it's 70 kilometers, gets liked automatically. And then after that, once I get matched with them, then I do look at their pictures, their profile. The forums also provided a place to release tensions and receive support related to harassment. Users voiced concerns and exchanged tips on how to stay safe. Harassment is unfortunately common for online daters. P7 describes typical harassment that she has experienced. I felt uncomfortable. I'm a minority, I'm an Indian woman, and I'm overweight. So there's some comments about that that I really, really don't appreciate. And about 28% of online daters have experienced harassment in some form. However, we observe the community forums being used as positive and used for support for harassment victims. For example, when P8 received an upsetting message, she first turned to the OkCupid subreddit's static FAQs to understand how to respond. And despite the FAQs clearly answering her question, stating that she just shouldn't bother messaging back because there was no point, she still chose to post the message on the forums to get community support. The forums provided victims visibility and acknowledgement of disturbing behavior that was hidden, sometimes offsetting it with humor. Forum members also shared advice on safety in the social media ecosystem. For example, users spoke of never using the same photos on online dating and social media sites, stating that determined individuals could use Google reverse image search to track down daters trying to remain anonymous. And for example of the variety of ways that people would sort of warn others, here's a recent post from after our publication, warning users that they should obscure their marathon numbers and uploads, since one could possibly track down an individual with just that information. These fears were echoed by posters and participants in many ways. P8 says, I don't know how messed up these people are, but what if they do something with it and then post it on my Twitter? In this situation, you have somebody who is personally hurt, and they can really mess things up for you if they wanted to. Finally, just general frustrations with online dating were very common. These frustrations came in the way of just not feeling like information was accurate or descriptive. Many participants spoke of desiring a more immersive, experiential form of online dating. People are not very good at describing themselves. Everyone's always fun-loving, loves to laugh, loves to travel, loves to hang out with friends, loves to watch Netflix or go out to the bar. I wish there was some better way to get descriptions of people. And many frustrations centered around people not understanding the systems. P5 says, I don't know if I'm really getting drowned out. Like, somebody just can't even see my message because they're getting so many. But it can also be like, you know, people are just getting all these like really weird messages, and then they get burnt out on the whole thing, and they're like, ugh, here's another one. I don't want to read that one either, so I don't know. So why aren't people responding? What could I be doing differently? Should I be doing anything differently? Is it me? Why do I need to filter through so many boring, harassing, or irrelevant messages and profiles just in order to find love? In summary, online communities played a big role in helping some users learn site norms. We found that users really wanted to understand how to succeed with online dating and use the forums as a place to share findings and glean information and tips. And the subreddits we studied were truly rich communities, one even organizing offline meetups for their members. Traditional ways of looking at online communities weren't helpful when first looking at these systems, but when coupled with using the forums as a window into the system behavior, we were able to get a more complete picture of the role that community can play in online dating. So thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
We'll be taking questions. You can line up with that mic in the middle, please. Behind Victoria.
Hi, really interesting talk, Nitesh Goel, Cornell. Hi. I was wondering, what leads people to go on subreddit? You mentioned frustration. You mentioned when people have challenges. Are there success stories of OkCupid and Tinder that get shared on subreddit? And a part of that is there a particular demographic or technographic of people that go to subreddit versus those that don't?
Yes, there are many different ways that people use these subreddits. A lot of people would just share humorous stories and sort of go there in downtime and build connections just within the communities. They definitely were deeper than just people going there out of frustration and venting. They were very, very rich communities where people forged genuine connections. Some people stayed on these communities even after leaving online dating systems, and some people were on the communities without even ever using online dating. So, yes.
Just to follow up, did people find love on subreddit? Did people find love on these subreddit forums?
That's a great question, and I don't know. Maybe.
It's really interesting subject matter. I'm glad you got into this because I think it's a big change that's happening now, and that people's values around this are changing as well. And I wanted to know if you had any commentary on the couple of things. So one is that, there used to be a huge stigma attached to finding a mate through some classified or online resource, and I think that's very much changing as it's becoming more and more the norm. And then the other thing is, the degree, if you could comment a little bit, if you've got any information about the degree to which people are trying to separate these worlds versus bring them together. And that is, the dating pool is kind of like this little private space that people go to, and they kind of put on this self-presentation that isn't really what their friends probably see them as, and so there's something different on Facebook versus what they are on LinkedIn versus what they are in a dating pool. And the reason why I bring this up was because we had an intern at Park a few years ago, Greg Norsey, who was tried to invent something that tied aspects of the online profile in a dating site to other things that it would be very hard for people to lie about, like their age, their height, and so on. And I think that's interesting, the idea of trying to bring these things together versus separate them. I'm Victoria Bellotti.
Those are two great points. So in terms of how things are changing with online dating, I think online dating is just very, very prevalent. For example, 41% of college graduates know someone who's used online dating to find a spouse or long-term partner. So it's not even just like sort of a subculture, counterculture thing. It's not really a small pocket anymore. It's very, very widespread. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And as to your second point, sort of tying things together, looking at these systems in new ways, I think that's also very important. And there's a lot of different things that could be done that haven't been looked at yet, and I think that's an excellent point.
All right, we've got time for one more question, if you can keep it short and not add...
Yeah, short. Okay. Junia Anacleto from Federal University of Brazil. I would like to know what is your concept of community?
Concept of community?
Yes.
I guess the concept of community in this case, we're looking at these subreddits that were larger than just the didactic sort of like one-on-one conversations. And I think...
Yeah, I think there is a lot of confusion around community, and trustability would be one aspect that should be in there if it is a community, or fairness, or self-control, and a lot of other things that really define a community. Maybe this is a pre-question.
That's a great point. I think I might need to go, but we can talk about this later if you'd like. Thank you so much for your question.